very happy to welcome to the show right now Chris from Lost Output Clock and @austerity_sucks on Twitter. This guy is my economic advisor here on the show. Hey, what's going on, man? How's everything going?
Pretty good, man. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So first, let's just go right to JFK's time in office first, because that's also interesting, and that kind of sets up the event of his assassination. So what's your overall take on JFK's politics? Would you say he was just flat out progressive like the mold of FDR, or was he like a moderate left-winger, or was he, somewhat conservative? How do you view his legacy in office?
Oh, well, that's probably the best aspect of this whole thing, because when you get into the whole conspiracies, there's not a smoking gun really anywhere, but the stuff that's factual is crazy enough. This was like the most interesting time period, the '60s, because this is the time when the Democrats and the Republicans were kind of in that point where they were switching, and
right, yeah.
JFK at the time he was in Dallas. He was on like a southern road tour because the Democratic Party, it was like a weird alliance between Dixiecrats who were pro-segregation and these like aristocratic Northeasterners who and Midwesterners who didn't really care about the segregation, but they were more interested in economic issues. So he was going down to Dallas, and he was going down to Miami. And all this was just in the name of trying to hold together this weird alliance in the Democratic Party. And
but in terms of his policies, though, because this is what interests me, and there's not all that much stuff out there. I know conservatives like to say that he cut taxes, and to be fair, he did take the top marginal rate from 90% to 70%, but he also closed loopholes, and there was actually a net increase in taxes. It actually increased revenue to the government. So that takes care of that. I would say he's progressive on the issue of taxes, but in terms of in other aspects. So for civil rights, he's known as like the champion of civil rights, but that was more later on. So do you know of any other issues where he's really progressive, other than, because those are the only two things that really stick out in my mind?
Well, I mean, he wasn't even really running when he. That's the thing. He ran to the right of Nixon on issues of Castro and anti-communism in general, because. He was this war veteran who was, worshipped for his age and for his looks and all kinds of different things. So he sort of has this aura of being really progressive, but he really wasn't progressive. Economically, you could say.
From my reading, I took the same thing away. I was always looking for, all right, so where does he stand on the policies? And again, you could give him credit for taxes. The Republicans are wrong. He didn't really, like I said, he didn't, actually cut them this tremendous amount. But other than that, like I always said, I think LBJ on domestic policies got a bum rap, because he's the guy that signed the Civil Rights Act. He's the guy that implemented a lot of the social safety net programs. He did the war on poverty. So if anything, LBJ was more progressive on domestic issues. On foreign policy issues, you can't say that because of Vietnam. But then again, when JFK was in office, Vietnam was going on. He didn't withdraw the troops immediately. He didn't withdraw them at all.
No, and that's a good point. And also, he was presiding over the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. His foreign policy. Wait a second, because that's interesting. Wait, we just struck on something I was going to get to in a little bit, but let's talk about it now because you mentioned it. Now, I've read two separate things about the whole Bay of Pigs incident. Now, my original thought on that, when I was first reading about that portion of history, I just simply connected the dots that, okay, Bay of Pigs happened while JFK was president, right? It was a few months. No, but Eisenhower. It was conceived under Eisenhower, though, so it was kind of like a legacy project that JFK sort of found himself presiding over.
Which leads me to my second point, which is the other part I've read about history, which is that it was actually the CIA carried it out without even letting him know that they were going to do it.
Well, that's going too far. He knew that it was going to go down. Like, he's still the commander-in-chief. And he was sort of kept out of the loop a little bit by Allen Dulles, and that's why he fired Allen Dulles. And that's sort of the kernel of a lot of conspiracy theories, is that Allen Dulles and other Southern interests colluded to get back at him.
See, this is where, now here's where I start getting fuzzy on it, and here's where a lot of question marks pop up in my head. Because if it is true that he fired that guy, and if it is true that he was mad enough at him to fire him like that, then I don't think it's all that outlandish that, he might have not known that they were going to do the Bay of Pigs.
Well, no, I mean, it's on the record that he, like the official public record shows that JFK had knowledge that it was being implemented. Like, he was rabidly anti-Castro and anti-communist. JFK was, like, we're talking like Nixon was when in the election, JFK was running on Nixon being a softie and not going after Castro. The Republican Party not going after Castro hard enough and stuff like that. So, and that's why I was mentioning that whole thing about holding together this Democratic alliance, because it was such a strange period where the parties were kind of beginning that shift, or like switching places basically in terms of traditional views. And so that's why it's hard to say, was he a progressive? Was he a conservative? That's really difficult to say, because in the start he was definitely conservative. And RFK, Robert Kennedy, he became more progressive as well, because he's as he was beginning to run for president, as he was senator, and he sort of embraced the civil rights movement. But it's not like they were champions early on. They were conservatives. They were anti-communist. They were aggressive in foreign policy, and that's something that needs to be considered, because it's not just black and white. Because that's the period of time that's so interesting. Is that
I think that last point you just made, that's the one I definitely agree with, where you say it's really not just black and white. Because when I read his history, I said, okay, well, on this issue he's progressive, this one he's progressive, this one he's moderate, and then on these it seems to be that fervently anti-communist. That's not progressive at all. In fact, back then, unions in the United States were very sympathetic to the communists, and for good reason. Because look, a lot of the communist policies were actually flat out pro-worker. I'm not saying the entire system, can work. I don't think it can work. But certain aspects of it certainly, would have helped out your average citizen in the U.S. But I want to jump to the specific conspiracy theories. Let's go through them one by one and knock them down, or not, depending on whatever your view on it is. So first of all, here's the first one: the Soviet Union was involved in his killing. Yes or no?
No. There's very little evidence that would indicate that the Soviets would go that far. They didn't even want to go to. They were so reticent in terms of going to the brink of nuclear war and stuff. There's no chance they would risk overtly assassinating the United States president. It wouldn't even. It's not conceivable.
Okay, how about the other one? Cuba was involved in his killing. Yes or no?
That's no. And Castro actually spoke on this. This guy Jeff Goldberg, I think, from the Atlantic, he mentioned that he had an interview with Castro, and Castro said that he actually doesn't believe that Oswald was a lone gunman. But Castro, there's not a lot of good evidence about that either. They denied Oswald the visa from the Mexican embassy for Cuba. So that's no.
Okay, conspiracy number 3. The mafia was involved in his killing. Yes or no?
This is where I disagree with Tom Hartman, who I know you have a lot of respect for. He wrote a good book together with Lamar something or other, Legacy of Secrets, where he thinks Traficante and these mob elements were involved. And that's, I think, a red herring, because the CIA and the deep state, they were just sort of conveniently embracing the mob to be against Castro. So I think that's a red herring, and so I would say no.
Okay.
And that's against Tom Hartman, who I respect a lot, so that's difficult for me to say.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both respect him a lot, but that doesn't mean he's right about everything. I mean, it's hard to find somebody you 100% agree with.
Absolutely,
Next one is LBJ. LBJ, take part, yes or no?
This is very difficult, because Barr McClellan, he was an attorney, political advisor, lobbyist to LBJ and the Democrats, the Southern Democrats, and he's insistent that LBJ was involved. The evidence is really light there, so I would say no. If I had to say yes or no, I would say no. But there's some really convincing evidence that really makes you think twice.
Now, before we get to this final one, let me just throw something out there real quick. I read an interesting CNN article, actually either earlier this week or last week. Really caught my eye. I was kind of amazed as I read it. It was, I forget the guy's name, but he was like, this researcher of the JFK assassination for so many years. And he actually went through all these different conspiracies, and he shot down, all these different ones for various reasons. And then at the bottom of the article, it said the only conspiracy that he wasn't able to completely disprove, the only one that it's still somewhat of an open question, was the CIA. Now, remember, this is CNN we're talking about, the most mainstream, news organization there is, right? And they're running an article saying, maybe CIA, maybe. So now I pose it to you, on the CIA, were they involved, yes or no?
Yes, absolutely, 100% they were involved, yes. And that's where I agree with Oliver Stone and Kuznick. They've done a lot of good work on that. I was going to say Oliver
Stone, he talks about this in his Untold History of the U.S. So if you can, in as brief a way possible, could you break that down for everybody? And also myself, because you'd have to educate me a little bit on this too, because I probably don't know as much about this as I should. But go ahead, explain.
For the most part, Stone, I disagree with him on. He has this whole elaborate thing about how JFK was going to change the world, and the curve of the ball of history would change, and him being assassinated changed all that. I don't buy that one bit. I look at JFK as sort of like an Obama figure, where
right.
Imagine in 2009. And this is a really bad counterfactual, but imagine if Obama was assassinated in 2009. Everybody
right.
would be saying, "Oh my God, he was going to change the world." There's no, "Oh my God, I can't believe they did that." But in reality, he hasn't done shit, right? It just seems he has a lot of potential. But okay, so back to the CIA though. But that's where I agree with Stone, because there's just so much evidence about the CIA's involvement with Oswald and David Ferry,
who is this. And weren't they all going to
get
fired, right? Weren't they all going to get fired? Wasn't he about to fire all of them?
Well, JFK famously said he wanted to smash the CIA into like 1,000 or 1,000,000 pieces and scatter them around. Like he was definitely virulently anti-CIA because the Bay of Pigs was such a clusterfuck, and because he just saw the deep state, so to speak, undermining democracy. So that's one area where JFK really started to get pretty damn progressive, and that's also around the time he started to embrace civil rights.
So let me ask you, does this all come back to how, the CIA for so long, from World War II and onward, the CIA, they just flat out went around the world, overthrowing democratically elected governments, putting in puppet governments that served U.S. corporate interests. And was it JFK who saw them doing that and essentially said, yeah, I don't want you doing that, or if you are going to, at least run it by me? Is that what this all comes down to?
I guess JFK, it seems like he was on, it's apparent from his executive order on civil rights and from his statements that are part of the public record now about the CIA and stuff, that it appears as though he was sort of on this path to some serious change. But when it comes down to it, there's just so much evidence of CIA linkages. Like Oswald's alias and his Free Play for Cuba stuff was in the same building as CIA side operations. There's and we need to go into the evidence then as well, because that's really where it becomes a sort of question of, do you really believe that Oswald was the lone shooter? And that's a separate.
I was going to get to that in a second, which is
because you have to go there in order to explore. Was it really just Oswald? Because the CIA, they've got a number of people, John Stockwell, others who have said, this is like vintage CIA, like ex-CIA people who have come out and sort of blown the whistle even and said this is like some bad. This is how it went down.
What do you think it was? It was Oswald was one person, but then also somebody in the grassy knoll, I presume.
Well, let me ask you then. Have you seen the Zapruder film? I presume you've seen it like in its full glory.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up before. I have, and there was some documentary, I guess you could call it, but I'm not sure how accurate it was, on, I think, National Geographic the other week. And they said that when they got it into HD, that you could see the blood mist coming out of the front of JFK's head, which would, kind of corroborate the fact that, what's-his-face, Oswald shot him, and the bullet actually did come from the back. But the thing that gets me is, while the mist, that is a fair argument, on the side of Oswald did it, but the way his head moves, I mean, his head just looks like it fucking got shot from the front. It doesn't even look,
back
look
into
close.
The left,
it just looks like he got shot from the front.
Yeah, the physics of it seems to point to a grassy knoll shot where Oswald's head gets the bullet, carries the head from the back into the left, and that there's no way to really replicate that from Oswald's position. And also, when you try to reproduce the shooting, it's really difficult, even with expert marksmen, to reproduce that, especially with the weapon that Oswald used. It seems highly unlikely that he alone was able to shoot 3 shots. That's the official story, is that it was 3 shots within 8 seconds. That's almost impossible to do. When you just look at all the reproductions, you can stretch it and imagine that perhaps he could have done it, and that would be like a statistical anomaly. And I'm open to that. It's possible. But it seems a lot more likely that this follows like not a mob hit the way Tom Hartman implies, but more like a military assassination. Like this was, and I think that when you look at the Zapruder film, it's really hard to see how the autopsy photos, like they released autopsy photos that showed that the back of the head was completely fine, but all these Parkland, which is the name of the hospital that JFK was taken to, all the Parkland doctors, they said that the back of the head was blown out. So there's a lot of contradictory evidence there.
There was a poll, I think, from this week. I'm not sure whether it was the Pew poll or Gallup poll. 61% of the American people say that it wasn't just Oswald. There's some sort of a conspiracy. And look, I'm one of those guys. I don't shut out all conspiracies because there are some that have just flat out been proven. Whether it's the Tuskegee experiments or others, we can list a couple here, but I guess
MK Ultra is real.
The thing that leads me towards, and again, I got to be clear, I'm agnostic. I really don't know the answer on this, but I guess the reason why I lean towards thinking that's possible, if not likely, is that, again, the CIA, their whole job, their whole existence was to overthrow governments of other nations, third world nations, second world nations, put in a U.S. puppet government, and just basically it's a new version of imperialism, American imperialism, run by the CIA as opposed to just flat out like the British did it with having the army invade everywhere, right? So if they do it to other leaders, why not do it to like this young president that came out of nowhere seemingly, who wasn't going to exactly play ball 100% with the establishment? What I'm saying is it's entirely possible. I'm not saying I believe it 100%. I'm just saying it's entirely possible.
Right, but also you got to think, okay, they were if the CIA was involved, and I do believe that they were involved. How come they couldn't kill a guy like Castro, but they could kill our own president? That seems kind of bizarre. That if the CIA was so hyper competent that they were able to get our own president, how the fuck could they not get Castro down on that little island? That seems really implausible.
That seems. But doesn't that seem like more of an argument for people who say it's not a conspiracy, though?
Right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm providing the other side, exactly. So when you revisit the case, it's so difficult to stick to your guns and say, you know what, I think it was the mob, or no,
well,
you know what, I think it was
that's why I said, I'm agnostic. I don't pretend, to know something about stuff I don't know, and that's why I think you and I talking about it is a good idea, so we could air it out a little bit. But look, I got to run because we're way over time. But thanks so much for the call. It was a great one. We really got through a lot of good stuff, and we'll talk to you next month.
All right, thanks for having me on.